Good morning. Welcome to A Web of Stories. My name is Melinda, and I am here to do my weekly reading wrap-up, as long as a bunch of other videos I'm batch filming today, but today we're going to do the weekly reading wrap-up. So this week has been pretty good. Let's see, I finally got my son's Halloween costume ordered. He's going to be kind of a monk thing, and this was really like what we were able to get him. I've been asking him for a while what he wanted to be Halloween, and I am someone who thinks that teenagers should be able to trick-or-treat. I think you should be able to trick-or-treat until you graduate from high school, so I'm glad to let my kids trick-or-treat. But and teenagers can come to my house as long as they're polite. But I've been asking my son, who's 13, for a while what he wanted to be, and he kept coming up with these things I'd never heard of, and so I'd look them up, and there was no costume for them. And his sister, my daughter, who's 14, is going to be Daphne, and her friend is going to be Velma. So I suggested to my son, why don't you be Scooby? And he did not like that. And then I saw a costume for an inflatable taco, and he loves tacos. So I said, why don't you be a taco? He's like, I don't want to be that either. So he's going to be this kind of like monk thing that you might see in Dungeons and Dragons. I was able to get the costume before Halloween because we're at this point now that when you order costumes, they may not come until November. So our choices were limited. That's what he's going to be. Other than that, we had a couple nice sunny days, and fall has once again descended on our area. Can't be upset. It's that time of year. I'm ready for fall. I'm ready to sit in my reading chair and bundle up in my blanket, kick the cat off, and then bundle up in my blanket, and then have the cat come sit on my lap. It's what we do. So those of you who saw my short, don't worry. The cat came back and sat on my lap. It's all good. Right now, she's upstairs sleeping on my bed. So, television. We're watching two shows right now, and I have something to say about both of them. So my husband and I have started watching the Netflix series, The Fall of the House of Usher. I'll get to it, but I listened to The Fall of the House of the Usher this week. But this is interesting because it's called The Fall of the House of the Usher, but it's really just a bunch of Poe things, Edgar Allan Poe things put into a series that is really, we all know it's about the Sackler family. Like, that's what it is. It's not super scary, I don't think. And my tolerance for actually watching horror is pretty low. And I don't think it's super scary. It's a little bit gross at times. It's crazy. I do find it distasteful at times, but in a way that kind of works with the story. I don't know if it's going to be a hit with us, but we are watching it. So we'll see how it goes. I don't know if I'd recommend it at this point. It might be, good to, if you've read Poe, maybe check it out because there's a lot of Poe references for it. And Maria Andrea is the one who recommended it to me because I asked on my Discord, information down below, if this was worth watching. And she said that what she had seen so far she liked. So we're watching it, and it's entertaining. It's something for the two of us to watch together. So, and because actually, there's 3 shows. There's also Loki, which we're watching with the whole family, but we have to watch that on Fridays because on Thursdays is Lessons in Chemistry. So let's talk about Lessons in Chemistry. Actually, it's still wonderful. The 3rd episode aired last night. I'm not going to spoil anything except to say that they handle 6:30 wonderfully. So I'm very happy about that. But have a rant. Sort of about Lessons in Chemistry, but not really about Lessons in Chemistry. It's really about the Book Riot podcast. So on the most recent episode of the big podcast, the Book Riot podcast, which is a podcast I love because I get a lot of news and talk about the business. However, the hosts are very much in their white tower. For example, a few months ago, one of them was traveling, and he said, I picked up this book at the airport that was so surprising. Have you heard of it? And he said what the book was. And the other host said, no, I haven't heard of it. That's amazing. I'll have to check that out. This was like a month, maybe 2 months ago. The book that he had picked up at the airport to read on his trip, which he had never heard of, was Legends and Lattes. So I can accept the fact that this is not their kind of book because it's not my kind of book either. Everyone I know who's read it has really enjoyed it. So I'm not dissing it. I'm just saying it's not my kind of book, but I've heard of it. I also I have a booktube channel, but I don't work in the publishing industry. So really there's no obligation for me to know things like this. So the fact that they had no clue what this book was blew my mind. So that's kind of reference on kind of where I do think that they're very much in their ivory tower. So this episode I was listening to today, which I'm a member of the Real House, so I get it early. I think this actually is going to drop for everybody on Monday, so spoiler. They're talking about the adaptation of Lessons in Chemistry. And one of them had watched one episode and the other had watched two, because on the first night, 2 episodes dropped and then it's 1 episode after that. And they said, well, I liked it, but you know, it's okay. There are things, and they went on and then they just started talking about how this just does not work. Basically, their argument was, we watched Mad Men, so why should we watch Lessons in Chemistry? And I'm like, what? Because they take place at the same time. What did you expect them to do? To like move Lessons in Chemistry to protect your fragile desires about your viewing? No. That's like saying, I can't watch The Big Bang Theory because I watched Friends, so I've already seen a show with single people. No. And they talked a lot about how the tone wasn't right and all this. Now they said that they had given the book like a B+. That's where they would rate it. It was a 5-star book for me. So I understand, like, I have more affinity for the source material. I think they've handled this amazingly well. I was worried about, for example, how they were going to handle 630, and they've done it very, very well. By the way, I sobbed through the 3rd episode. But anyway, back to that. So, and I can get, like, you know, not everyone has to like something. Like, just because I think that the adaptation of Lessons in Chemistry so far has been fantastic doesn't mean I think everybody has to be fantastic. However, when your reasons for complaining about something make no sense, then I'm like, really? Now, if they said, you know, I wasn't, you know, we're not super fond of the source material. So yeah, okay, that's fine. But to say, well, I already got this when I watched Mad Men. What? And then the other one said, well, you know, it's not really Bonnie Garmis's fault, but it's in our minds. I'm sorry that your mind is so limited that you can't look past that. That's not a Lessons in Chemistry problem. It's not a Bonnie Garmis problem. It's a them problem. So anyway, that's my rant. I was like, I was driving my son, dropped him off at school and drove home. On days that I get back in time to take him to school after I check my daughter's school, I take him to school. So I'm like, all the way home. Anyway, so if you listen to this podcast, just know that I think they're full of it when they talk about Lessons in Chemistry, the adaptation. I am loving it. I think it is so wonderful. They have done such an amazing job of it. So if you have Apple TV, and especially if you liked the book Lessons in Chemistry, check it out. Brie Larson is fantastic. I mean, give her an Emmy now. She's fantastic in this role. So, and have Kleenex, because the 3rd episode is really a tearjerker. If you've read the book, you know kind of what's going on in the 3rd episode. But, oh well. So let's get to the week's reading. So this past week, I finished 5 books, which is pretty good because I've been kind of slower lately. So the first one was an audiobook I've been listening to for a really long time, which is None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell. This is a thriller. In an earlier video, I said it was like a single white female-ish thriller. That's not super accurate, but there's just some elements of the single white female trope that are kind of there, but I wouldn't, after listening to it, would not call it a single white female kind of book. It is very twisty. It's very stressful in the way it's meant to be stressful. So in this case, saying it's stressful is a good thing because it's supposed to evoke that response. And it does do that. Fabulous narration. Like, I'm going to say this is a book that I have not read it, but I listened to it and I do think that that is the way to go. There's a podcast element to this book. And whenever there's a podcast element to a book, I want to listen to it because I think that's the way it's supposed to be. And that's really the case here. My one complaint is not that it's not the events of the ending, just kind of like how the ending was kind of handled. Didn't quite live up to the rest of the book for me. Just the way it was written, not the events. So, and that might just be me. It was just kind of like a dip right at the end, but still a very enjoyable listening experience, reading experience. I gave it an A. So if you're interested in something like that, it's really good if you're reading like heavier books and you want something kind of like, something that'll suck you in, but you don't have to put a lot of brain power in staying engaged with it. Like, it does the work, the heavy work for you. This is a good option. So the next one I listened to is a short story, and I already mentioned it. It's The Fall of the House of Usher. And I did listen to it because I had said, I'm going to try out this Netflix show. There's really not. You don't need to do that. This, as I said, The Fall of the House, it takes the title and it takes some character names. But really that TV show is a Poe in general adaptation. That being said, I do wish I had read that before I had read What Moves the Dead, because What Moves the Dead is a much more direct retelling of it. And it's great. I liked What Moves the Dead. My issue is that because I had read What Moves the Dead, The Fall of the House of Usher wasn't as shocking to me as it would have been had I not already read What Moves the Dead. Does that make sense? Like, I'm recommending both how Fall of the House of Usher and What Moves the Dead. I'm just recommending them do Fall of the House of Usher first, because that's a story and What Moves the Dead is a novel. It's a short novel, but it's a novella novel, but it has so much more depth. So it just makes sense to read the short story first. And I listened to an audio. It was great. And then I read The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman, which is another short novel or novella. Can I tell you how much I love this book? Like, it was perfect. It was like a little bit horror. It was fantasy. It captured childhoodness. It had a lot of magic. I was sucked in. This book was fantastic. Neil Gaiman is kind of like Stephen King. I did the Stephen King tag earlier this week. Is an author that I really respect, but I don't read a lot of their stuff. But every time I've read Neil Gaiman, I love it. Probably more so than Stephen King, honestly. Although I'm much more, I think generally, Stephen King is more attractive to me as a reader because I kind of know what to expect. Whereas Neil Gaiman, and this is not a diss, this is a good thing. Neil Gaiman is more experimental. So there's a bigger risk for me with reading Neil Gaiman than there would be with me reading Stephen King. But the risk really paid off with this one. I loved The Ocean at the End of the Lane. It is short. If you have not read it, highly recommend it. And it's perfect right now because it is a little bit horror-ish. The part that got me a little bit was not even, sorry, my husband's in the kitchen. The part that got me kind of like up wasn't even like it's something else that happens in the book, but it was written in such a way that I was like reading it. So really highly recommend A+ book, The House at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. And then I finished Vampires of El Norte, and I need to talk about this one a little bit. I went into this book with lowered expectations. I had heard a lot of people had already read this and they had said their thoughts, and their thoughts were very similar kind of across the board, is that this is really not a horror novel. It's a romance, which had I not known that going into it, because it is, having read it, I will tell you it is a romance, not a horror novel. Had I not known that going into it, I would have been very upset, but I did know going into it. So I went into this expecting the romance with horror elements, and that's what this is. But I don't think it's incredibly successful as that. For one thing, if I'm reading a romance, I want to see some kind of growth in the relationship. And this is second chance romance is probably the trope that it falls most likely in. There's no growth in the relationship. It's very stagnant. I was getting very frustrated that as far as the relationship between Nena and Nestor, nothing, it's just sort of there. And then all of a sudden it's something else. This also falls into the trap that I see a lot in especially in romance. It is not endemic to romance. This is not a hallmark of romance. It's not in every romance novel. It's just something, if I'm going to see it in a book, it's probably more likely to be a romance, is that the conflict comes completely from two people just not talking to each other. And that gets very frustrating to me as a reader because I just want to bang their heads together. And a lot of it was like this. Now, the horror elements. Vampires. Let's talk about the vampires. The vampires in this book, are not what are classically considered vampires. I think when we think of vampire, we think of like a humanoid kind of monster, blood-sucking, that sort of thing. We think Dracula. We think something, the undead, something like that. That's, other than blood-sucking, that's not what these vampires are. These vampires are much more animalistic. They aren't, there's no concept of them being formerly alive and now being undead. They're just monsters that do suck blood. So to me, I think that that's a little bit of false advertising, because I think everyone kind of accepts what a vampire is, and these are not that. And I think if this is a catchy title, so maybe I have issues with the title of this book, because if I hear Vampires of El Norte, I am expecting a vampire horror novel, and that's not what this is. It's not a horror novel. It's a romance with horror elements. And the vampires are not any kind of vampire that I would recognize. They're just really monsters. I do understand, I read the afterword. I understand what Cañas was trying to do, metaphor with like colonialism. I don't think she was successful there either. I see her attempts though. The thing is, Isabel Cañas is a great writer. She can write. Her prose is lovely. The Hacienda was a really solid debut. I am more than happy to chalk this one up as a sophomore slump. I gave it a C+. I can't recommend it, but I will definitely be reading her next book. It's what it is. It just, I'm glad I read it, so now I know. But everything that I heard about it, first of all, thank you to everyone who reviewed this before me. Helped me set my expectations. So, because I do think my review would be even worse had I not known that. But, you know, it just wasn't a successful book. And then finally, oh my God, I finished Life Ceremony by Sayaka Murata. This is a short story collection. I started it for Short Story September and was continuing to read it. So this is a tough one. I went into this knowing it was going to be weird. I also went into knowing cannibalism was going to be a thing. And there is cannibalism in it. That's not a problem. The story that had the cannibalism was like a story that was not a problem story for me. I know that the traditions in Japanese literature are very different than Western traditions. I know that. I recognize that. I think this may be too Japanese for me in a lot of places. Sometimes it's weird. I mean, sometimes these stories are weird. And sometimes they're weird in kind of a good thought-provoking way. And sometimes they're weird in just like, what is this kind of way? And it's pretty much half and half. I'm glad to be done with it. It's going to a little free library. I'm not even passing it on to friends. I don't think I'm going to read any more Sayaka Murata. I do recommend Convenience Store Woman. Earthlings is her other book. I've heard... Earthlings is a very hard book for a lot of people. I've never heard anyone have a really good time with that book. Just saying, I'm not even going to try it. I don't think I'm going to read any more Sayaka Murata. I think that she's just too Japanese for me, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. She deserves all the accolades in Japan. It's just that I am not comfortable with a lot of those traditions personally. That's on me. This book is not for me. I would only recommend this to people who are really comfortable with Japanese writing and the traditions in Japanese literature. I'm glad I'm done with it. So that's what I finished this week. So let's go into what I am currently reading. So I am still working on a number of short story collections. I'm not going to just keep showing those every week. I will list them down below, but I'm not going to include them in the video because it gets repetitive, with kind of one exception, and I'll get to that. So I have 3 books going in print. I am still reading The Way We Live Now, which is the group read for Victober. I am 3 days behind, and I'm kind of like steadily 3 days behind. So I have a feeling I'm going to finish this book on November 3rd. I'm trying to like absorb some time into it and kind of catch up, but we'll see. I'm enjoying it. It's, you know, it's fun. I think my issues with it are not with the book. They're just kind of with the way I'm reading it. If it were the only book I were reading, that would be different. But because I'm kind of reading bits and then going to other books, I think it's a little frustrating for me. I would be really interested if I ever do a reread of this, of doing it in audio to see how that goes. And I do know that there is an adaptation of it with starring David Suchet, not as Perot. That's good. So I think I'll check that one out. I am enjoying this though. It's just, maybe I'm not reading it the right way. We'll say that. But yeah, it's fun. There you go. And then yesterday I started The Gingerbread Men by Joanna Corrance. This is a horror novel. I am not far enough into it to really have an opinion. Basically, this guy's like at a Christmas bazaar or whatever with his fiance and a woman. He sees a woman and she's like, go this way. And he just leaves his fiance and goes with her. And he goes up to her hotel, which is somewhere up north in Scotland. And he's just there kind of happily with a bunch of other guys. It's very strange. I'm not far enough in to really have a feel of the lay of the land yet. So I can't say much about this one yet. Okay, now, I told myself I was not going to read this book yet until I had finished some more of my short story collections. However, last night, the book I'm reading on ebook, which I will get to in a bit, my Kobo was downstairs and I was tired and lazy and didn't want to go downstairs, and this book was right by my bed. So I started it. Roman Stories by Jhuma Lahiri. This is a short story collection. I am not putting this into my pile of short story collections. I'm leaving this one by my bed and I'm reading one story a night. None of the stories, looks like one story in the middle might be a little longer. Tab them out so I can see. But the stories aren't super long. So I've read the first one. It was beautiful. It was just what I want from Jhuma Lahiri. In her weird writing in Italian and then translating herself back, but needing help, even though she's a native English speaker. I don't understand this, but whatever. I'm just going to go with it. I'm going to mark her down on my spreadsheet. I marked down like nation of origin of authors. And I know her nation of origin is the United States, I think. It's the United States. Might be the UK, and then she moved to the United States. She was in the United States for the first part of her life. This woman has like adopted a country like no one else. So I'm putting her down as Italian. But I have really been looking forward to this book and I couldn't resist anymore. So there you go. Now, my ebook, the one that was downstairs in my purse. In fact, it's still in my purse. I am reading Evergreen by Naomi Hirahara. So this is the follow-up to Clark and Division, which I really enjoyed. I read it twice. I read it when it came out, and then I read it again with my book club, my Marginalized Writers book club. I will say this is not a great book club book. Mysteries just generally, because you kind of get wrapped up in the mechanics, unless you have a mysteries focused book club. Mysteries are hard because you get wrapped up into the mechanics of the mystery. I'm not saying it's impossible, it's just harder, but I think we fell into that trap when we were discussing Clark and Division. I still loved it, although I did not like the narrator of the audiobook. So, in Evergreen, Aki and her family have returned to Los Angeles from Chicago after the end of World War II. And Los Angeles is not at all what she remembers. Their house is gone. Their business is gone. They have to start from scratch. Before the war, they were middle class, solidly middle class, very comfortable, and now they're not. So what I'm liking about this book is what I really liked about Clark and Division is just the experience of being a Japanese American in that situation. So in Clark and Division, they were sent to an internment camp. I mean, this part of the book is really early in the beginning and it's not a spoiler. They're sent to an internment camp. And then there's a program that for Japanese Americans in the internment camps, if they can prove their loyalty enough, they can leave the internment camp and they're sent to a city, but not the city they came from. So her sister first, and then her and her family followed, were sent to Chicago. That's Clark and Division's setup. So in this, they're back in Los Angeles. I am a little kind of, that everyone, not everyone, but a bunch of characters from the Chicago story are now all in LA. And I just think that's a little bit weird. But whatever. The mystery itself is still unfolding. I can't really speak to the mystery right now. It's interesting. This book is told in first person. So you're only seeing things through Aki's point of view. And, that is frustrating, but in a deliberate way. Like it's supposed to be frustrating. You're supposed to feel Aki's frustration, and you do. So that's good. But we'll see. I can't really talk about the effectiveness of the mystery until I finish the book. So I am really going through this one quickly, so I will have it finished by my next update. And then finally, on audio, I am listening to The Turn of the Screw by Henry James because In my TBR, I have The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware. And I learned from The Fall of the House of Usher that you have to read the first one first, the original first. So I am listening to The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. I'm glad I'm listening to it. I can tell from it that probably Henry James' writing is not a good fit for me. But listening, I can deal with it. It's not super long. So I'm going to do that. I think once I finish this, though, I am going to start, even if it's not November yet, I'm going to start one of my nonfiction November audiobooks because it takes me a fairly long time to get through an audiobook, and I want to be able to get through both of the nonfiction November audiobooks that I have. So I think that's what I might do. Anyway, that is my week. Thank you for hanging out with me. If you made it this far, why don't you give me some kind of autumn, like an autumn leaf or something like that, something autumnish, little emoji, whatever, just so I know you made it through. And if you didn't make it through, don't worry about it. Or if you like made it through, but you wrote your comment halfway through, that's fine. I do that all the time. It's okay. It's just kind of interesting to see who puts the emoji there. It's not a test. Anyway, thank you very much. Please join my Discord and we can chat with each other. It's a lot easier to chat down in Discord than it is in the comments. Information is down below. Titles of all the books plus the short story collections I'm still working on are also down below. And if I mentioned any channels, I'll link them there too. I can't remember now. Well, I'll catch them when I edit it. Anyway, thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.